Hi everyone. Sorry, I'm just I'm just staring blankly at my screen here to see if the YouTube streaming is actually going to work. Okay, great. So it is working, and I have to hit the go live button. Okay, so it appears as if we are live on YouTube and Facebook. Yay! All right. Thank you everyone for your patience. I think there's just a delay on learning all this software. So here we are, and I wanted to just say welcome. Thank you everyone for joining me in this session. I'm honored to be here with you in this time of sensitivity and uncertainty, and I look forward to sharing time with you in our shared sacred space today. Here, our 63rd sacred space session. We did them weekly for about a year plus during the pandemic, the main, I guess, portion of the pandemic. And for the past, this will be the second month now that we've been doing them monthly. And so welcome. And things we'll do here in our time together in sacred space are, number one, in a few moments, I will go through the, I guess we'll call it the process of setting sacred space for us together here. And then we will talk about an overall topic. And the topic for this month will be finding nourishment in the sacred and profane. Finding nourishment in the sacred and profane. And we will, I'll explain a little bit more about that topic in a bit. At the end of that discussion, we'll have a bit of an exercise to take with you for the next week or month, as it were. And then we'll go ahead and close sacred space. So in setting sacred space, I'll start by saying that what we would like to do here, our goal or intention here for the next hour or two of time together, is to create and make a space which is devoid of fear, threat, and control, which is my sort of definition of what sacred space is, a space devoid of fear, threat, and control. In order for us to all be able to open to higher or deeper guidance from within our own selves, however you define that. It could be your intuition, it could be the God you worship that guides you, angels, ancestors, however you think about it, or just your intelligence, your higher intelligence, your wild-ass intuition, however you think about that. But in order to open to that guidance, however you define it, generally you do need to be in this a different quality of space from the space of everyday life. So we would like here to make a safe sanctuary space for all of us to be able to relax and surrender with no feeling of danger or threat, so that we can partake also of the nourishment, the emotional nourishment and the spiritual nourishment that comes from being in sacred space together as a group. And in opening sacred space today, I will propose, as I do every session, that we all follow the 4 principles of Presidian sacred space. Number 1, confidentiality. I refer to them as your standard Vegas rules, right? What happens in sacred space stays in sacred space. Now we're here online. There's a stream to YouTube. There's a stream to Facebook. The replay will be public, so we can't really do confidentiality per se, because we don't know, it's already public. So the way we kind of handle confidentiality when we're not in person, these are the sort of principles I developed for our in-person meetings around the world pre-pandemic, and hopefully we'll start those again in the next, 6 months or so. But the way we do confidentiality online then is via anonymization. So if you would like to be anonymous, you don't have to be anonymous, but if you would like to be anonymous, the way you would do that is to, you could watch anonymously on YouTube. I'm not sure if they even allow you to chat if you're anonymous, but you can come into the Crowdcast stream and go into the edit profile feature, change your username to Harry Potter or Mickey Mouse or whatever, and then under that username continue to chat, ask questions, what have you. The second principle of sacred space is that there is no, as much as possible, right? We're only human, but as much as possible in sacred space, we would like to refrain, all of us, myself included, from any feeling of threat to each other, controlling, right? And this isn't just like malicious controlling, but also well-intentioned controlling. So we don't try to fix each other's problems. There's no tough love. There's no finger wagging of like, well, you know, this is going to hurt you more than it hurts me. But you have to hear this, right? Now, there's nothing wrong with that per se, right? But because though that sort of action, however well-intentioned, does involve the use of the physics of basically fear, threat, and control, it categorically pitches us back into the profane. And so we are here, right, to try to maintain the sacred space, not because it's better, right? Sacred and profane are like salty and sweet. You need both. And the question is, what is the mix? Not because it's better, but because there are certain things you can only get done in sacred space. So there are certain things you can only get done when you go to the bank, when you go to City Hall to like file papers or whatever. So there's a different quality of space here. We go in there, get done the things we need to get done, and then we can come back into profane space. And then after the session, we can still sort of finger wag each other, you know, to our heart's content. So here we are holding space for each other to be however we are, right? To be afraid, to be anxious, or to be happy and relaxed, right? And then at the meta level, we hold space for each other to feel however we feel about how we feel. So for instance, if I'm afraid and I feel really incompetent and weak that I'm afraid, we just hold space for that. We don't try to fix it, right? If we're afraid and we're like, oh, of course I'm afraid. You'd be a fool to not be afraid. We hold space for that. If you're happy and you're like, you know, I'm okay with the fact that I'm happy. I'm all right. That's okay. Or if you're happy and relaxed and you're ridden with guilt, right? That, you know, the world is on fire and how can I be happy and relaxed? We hold space for that too, right? There's no threat, no controlling, no fixing, no tough love, no should. And that is the second major principle of sacred space. The third principle, which is a corollary to the first two, is that there is no commerce, right? So nothing may be sold or even recommended or suggested. So I can't sell you anything. Gowrie, my editor in Bangalore, who will be on screen in a few minutes, she can't sell you anything. Please refrain from selling things to each other in the chat, whatever stream you're in. And the idea here is that, and I've said this in past sessions, right? But commerce and marketing, right, is a form of fear, threat, and control. Well, I'm like trying to sell you something that will perhaps do you good. Buy this vitamin, buy this hair tonic if you want hair like mine, right? And the implied threat is if you don't do that, you won't get the result you want. So now there's nothing wrong with that, right? Commerce is fine, even if it's barter, even if it's non-capitalistic, there is still going to be commerce in the human world. So there's nothing wrong with being in a realm of fear, threat, and control, the marketplace commerce. But here in sacred space, if we remove fear, threat, and control, then we're also removing commerce. We're also removing recommendations or suggestions. So if you're like, oh, you know, my sister-in-law had that same thing and she read this book and it fixed her right up, let me give you this book, and I'm not making any money from it, I'm just doing it out of the goodness of my heart. We try to refrain even from that. Because it's not a question of whether I'm making money. It's like anything that is sort of pushed as a solution for something has that implied little bit of fear that if I don't do what you say, I may miss out. So for not forever, just for an hour or two, and just while we're here, we do our best to refrain from that. Said another way, we are here for your energy, not for the things you bring. We are here for what you are, not for what you do or provide, for who you are, not for your value add. So that's the third. And the fourth principle of sacred space is that there's no expectation of participation. Right? So there's no pressure to do anything. There's no pressure to chat or not chat, ask questions or not ask questions. You can send the link to your friends and post on Instagram and Facebook and get everyone else to join, or not. You can watch for 5 minutes. You can watch for 2 hours. You can watch the replay multiple times. Whatever is fine. There's no expectation of participation. There's no pressure to come to sacred space or stay to sacred space, stay in sacred space. Again, the nourishment of the quality of a space like this comes from the held space. and your presence and attention as you feel so moved. And again, from what you are, not from what you do or provide. And that even includes your participation. So that is what I propose. All of us now here doing that together, right, will tend to amplify that. You can also obviously hold sacred space for yourself when you're alone. This is basically what happens when we meditate or go for a long run or like journal, right? But when we come together in a group to do that, the group dynamics of us doing this for ourselves and for each other around the group will tend to amplify the energy of that effect. Okay, so this is what I'm proposing for the next little bit of time here. And if you are not okay with that, right, that's totally okay, no pressure. But we're about to cross the threshold into sacred space. So what I want to do here is I want to pause and give everyone a moment to just make their selection. And if you're not okay with doing this, feel free to withdraw from the group, turn off the stream, and we'll still catch up with you later in profane space and still hang out. We'll still be friends. If you're on my email list, obviously I will still send you emails. But that is what we will do. So I will pause now here to give everyone a moment to make their selection. Okay. All right. And so for the rest of us now, we will now move forward into our shared sacred space. And as we cross the threshold into our shared sacred space, I will just remind everyone, myself included, that we would like as much as possible to observe the 4 principles of sacred space: confidentiality/anonymization, no fear, threat, or control, no fixing, no tough love, no commerce, no suggestions, no recommendations, and no expectation of participation. Okay. All right. Here we are. Welcome to our sacred space, everyone. Happy Sunday. Happy month of July. I've missed actually the weekly tempo. I mean, it was a lot of work, but I've definitely missed sharing this every week. I thank you all for your support in being here. So let's talk about our topic for today. Our session topic for today will be finding nourishment in the sacred and profane. So this month, our monthly sort of mythical brainstorm call. So Gary and I have a call to sort of think about what we're going to talk about for each of these sessions. Gary is my editor, and she's based in Bangalore. And by the way, in Bangalore now, in that part of India, there have been a lot of rains. And it has affected the Wi-Fi there a little bit. So in the green room, we were testing. We think her connection should be okay, but if the sound is not working out, then just let us know. And then I may try to sort of jump in and finish telling the story if we get caught halfway. But this week's story, where she brought it to us and we reflected on it, it brought us to this reflection around the question of the nature of nourishment in the sacred and profane. Now, in the introduction, we just talked about like the emotional nourishment and sacred, spiritual nourishment that you get from being in the sacred. And this story hits on that exact issue. The question is like, how do we bring the gold of insight, the nourishment of the sacred, from the sacred into the profane realm, a realm of fear, threat, or control? So in this story, we will explore the dynamics of that. And the story she's chosen is a story from the Norse mythic tradition. So we'll have her come up and read the story to us. It's a story with Odin, Idun, Loki. So those of you who are like binging the new Marvel series Loki, may find this interesting. And so what I'll do is I will invite Gary on screen. Gary, if you're there, and we'll let her tell us about the story. Hi, Gary.
Hi.
How are you?
Can you hear me okay? Can you see me all
Yeah,
right?
I think your sound is good. Your sound is good.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's good to be back. Yeah.
So do you want to tell us about the story?
Yes. So the story is from Norse mythology. It's called Idun and Her Golden Apples. And as I was reading through some of the Norse mythic stories, I realized that this is one of the very rare stories that doesn't get talked about, doesn't really come up in any of the modern references. And Idun as the goddess is rarely ever mentioned outside of the story. So that part itself intrigued me, and I wanted to find out what the story is about. So then I up. So yeah, so that's Idun and her golden apples. Do you want me to start off the story?
Yeah, that would be
Sure,
great.
go ahead.
That would be great. I'm excited.
Let me see. I'm not sure if it's from my end, but I can't see Artie's stream.
Oh,
But if it's a problem with my connection,
I can hear
any of
you.
you could please let me know. Is it just me, or is Artie's stream gone?
I can hear you.
Okay, you can hear me. All right, so I'll just go ahead with the story then.
Okay.
Right, so the story really is about the theft of Idun's golden apples and how they came to be stolen. So we'll start off with one summer morning when Odin, the All Father, as he was called in Norse mythology, Odin, Loki, and Honir from Asgard crossed into Midgard. And they were quite happy to be in each other's company. They'd just come out kind of wandering. And they wanted to explore some part of the earth, that's Midgard, that they hadn't already seen before. So it was really early morning when they set out. And, they were like three friends who just went around wherever the wind took them. And they trekked all day. They talked about this and that. And they followed the path of a river. They came across fields. They saw lots of things. And by evening, they kind of realized that they had not brought any food. And they were beginning to feel a little hungry. So they started to look around to see what they can eat. And suddenly they had this luck to come across a herd of oxen that was grazing. So then Loki decided to kind of size them up and choose one of the oxen, and he killed an ox. And then Odin and Honir gathered all these fallen tree branches, and then they made a fire. So once the fire was ready, they started to, they cut the ox into huge pieces, and then they started to roast, the meat in the heart of the fire. And the smell that came up just made the gods even hungrier, and they could just barely wait for it to get cooked. And so they waited, and as soon as they thought that the joints were ready, they scattered up the fire, they pulled the meat out of the flames. And to their surprise, it wasn't ready. And Odin said, well, probably we're just so hungry that we couldn't wait, and it seemed like a long time. I think the meat needs to go back into the fire a bit. So they raked up the fire again, they put the meat back in, and they suddenly realized the sun had started to go down, and the wind got chilly, and everything was cold. It didn't at all seem like a summer day. So they wrapped up their cloaks around them, they sat and waited and waited. They told each other, do you think the meat's ready? Should we find out? And then they kind of, Loki again jumps back up on his feet, pulls out the meat, and he says, okay, it should be cooked by now. It's been long enough. And they pull the meat out, and it's still not ready. And it should have been, right? And there was nothing wrong with the fire. There was nothing wrong with the meat. So, and Honir notes that he pulls out the meat and says the meat is just as raw now as it was to begin with. I mean, what's going on? And something, Odin said, is working against this, right? something is making this meat not cook. And what could it be? And then there was a voice that came from right above them that said, well, that something is sitting up here. And the gods looked up and they saw this huge eagle sitting right there and said, well, if you let me eat my fill, your ox will be cooked. And, Odin saw that, okay, this was just wise, all right. We want to eat and you want to eat. And so that's fine. We agree. There's nothing else we can do. So then the eagle just flapped its wings, swooped down, settled over the place where the meat was cooking, immediately snatched up the biggest parts, the shoulders and parts of the rump, the biggest parts it could get, looked at the gods, and then just started to eat the meat. And Loki, looking at this, this is just pure greed, right? He looked at how the bird was eating. He was so angry because they'd been waiting so long to eat their food. And this bird just comes in and picks up all the, the best parts of the meat. So he took his staff. He was so angry at this that he took his staff and rammed it at the bird so as to kind of, he was just purely frustrated. And something strange happened. One end of the staff just got stuck on the bird's back, the eagle's back. But the other end of the staff got stuck with Loki's hands, and he couldn't get the hands to go apart. And immediately, because, when the staff stuck the bird got up and started to fly. And Loki was still stuck to the staff, so he was getting dragged along with the bird, and the bird kept flying. And it made sure that it flew just close to the ground so that Loki didn't have a smooth ride. He kept, bumping against boulders and rocks and thorny bushes, and he got scratches and wounds everywhere. And he started to scream. He begged for mercy. He wanted the eagle to let him go, but it just wouldn't. It kept on flying. At one time, it even dragged him right across a glacier, and he was almost skinned. And Loki kept yelling again and again for help. And finally, the eagle said, well, I'll let you go only if you will swear. And Loki said, anything, please have mercy, let me go. And the bird said, okay, only if you will swear to bring back Idun and her apples out of Asgard. So Idun is one of the goddesses in Asgard, and she carries these golden apples with her. So the eagle asked for this. And immediately Loki thought, oh, damn, I think I know what this is about. And Loki guessed that this eagle must be a giant in disguise, right? So he's almost cursing himself. And the eagle just kept on dragging. So he kept crying in pain, and he said, all right. You have it, I swear. I'll bring you Idun and her apples. It's fine. So the eagle said, okay, 7 days from now, you will lead Idun over Bifrost and get her out of Asgard, exactly when the sun is halfway between east and west. So Loki said, okay, I promise. So immediately, once he said that, he found that his hands were free. He fell to the ground, and he sort of picked himself up. And so he was all covered in wounds. He had to slowly sort of walk back. And 7 days passed after this incident, right? And Loki went to look for Idun. And Idun was wandering around in her garden, and she was singing softly to herself. And she was kind of childlike in her innocence, and she wasn't troubled by anything around her, anything in the world, suffering, wars, ravages, none of that affected her. And she had this basket of golden apples looped over her arm, and, she was walking around the garden. And Loki went up to her and said, Idun, you will not believe what I just saw. and you have to come with me. And she looked at him and said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, deep in the forest, just right outside Bifrost, I came across a tree, like this tree that glows with a soft light. And this tree is unlike anything I've seen in the 9 realms. And he went on to describe it in so much detail that anyone who had even, been a bit careful would have noticed that there was something off and that they'd become suspicious. But Idun was really innocent, so she was fascinated. So she said, okay, tell me more. What about this tree? And he said, well, this tree bears golden apples exactly the same as yours. So my guess is, just like your apples, these apples also must give unending youth. So I'd like you to come with me and bring these apples, your apples, and let's compare them. Let's see if they have the exact same quality. And if they do, we should take them to the gods at once. So Idun seemed fascinated, so she smiled and she said, okay, let's do that. So she brought her basket of apples. They both came to Heimdall's hall, from which they cross over. They walked out onto the Bifrost, and Loki led her out. And the moment she was out, this huge eagle was waiting there, right? It flew in, swooped onto the goddess, snatched her, and carried her and the apples back, straight over the sea, back to Jotunheim. And Jotunheim is the mountains where the giants live, just as Loki had suspected. Because this eagle was a giant called Thiazi in disguise. And Thiazi took her home and sort of lodged her in the mountains. And now he gloated. He was happy that he'd finally got her. He said, you'll stay here, and without you and without your apples, the gods will now age, and they'll begin to crumple. And because you're here, I will remain young forever. So that's what's going to happen. And so it turned out that after a while, the gods started to feel anxious. They started to miss Idun, and they started to wither and slowly grow old. And the skin became wrinkled. Their bones started to feel fragile. The eyes became bloodshot. The hands began to tremble. Some of them even lost their hair. Their joints started to creak and ache. And they started to worry that something had gone horribly wrong. So they all started to talk about what's going on and why this is so. And their immediate, thing was to go to Odin and ask him, because Odin was the wise one and he should know what was going on. And even Odin was going old. So everyone in Asgard was panicking by now. And they all started looking at each other and wondering what was going on. And suddenly it became kind of apparent that only Idun and Loki were missing in this entire gathering. Right? And Odin noticed it as well. He said, I think that's what it is. Idun is missing, and so are her apples. And you know how it is without her and without her apples. So who was the last person to see her? So it turns out Heimdall had seen her last, walking out across the Bifrost, right? And also that Loki was with her. So they all came to know what happened. So Odin said, okay, we must find Loki. He will know exactly what happened. And as tired as they were, they went around looking into every corner, every place in Asgard to see if they could find Loki. And funnily enough, they found him asleep in Idun's garden. And they bound him, gagged him, brought him, dragged him back to Odin and said, here's the mischief maker. We should ask him what he's done with Idun, right? And Loki just told them. He realized that he'd been caught. So told them what happened with the eagle, told them that unless he promised to kidnap Idun, he would have almost died. But Odin didn't take any pity at all. He was very stern the way he looked at Loki, and he said, all right, you had to promise to save your life, but it didn't mean that you had to fulfill that promise. So you consort with eagles and giants. So, we'll probably draw like a blood eagle on your back and punish you for this. So when he said that, Loki kind of shivered and shrank, and he said, no, I promise you I'll bring Idun back. But I need a favor. He said, if Freya, the goddess, if Freya can lend me her falcon skin, I'll fly to Jotunheim and bring her back. I swear it, I promise. And so it happened, beautiful Freya, who was now looking very old, almost lost all her hair. She came in and she had tears of gold falling from her eyes. She slowly took off her falcon skin and handed it over to Loki. And Loki took that and put it on and immediately just flew off to Jotunheim. And by the time he reached the mountains, it was already evening. And luckily, Thiazi and his daughter had gone fishing, so there was no one at home. And Idun was huddled around the fire. And as she was sitting there, Loki reached her and he said, I need to take you back. And he held her hands, chanted some magic runes, and he was still in his falcon skin. He immediately turned her into a small nut, held her in his talons, and started to fly back. And right at this moment, Thiazi the giant came back home, and he realized Idun was missing, and he knew that she couldn't have got out without help, right? So he saw Loki flying away, instantly turned back into an eagle for the third time in the story, and started to chase Loki at great speed. And meanwhile, Odin was watching. He has this one eye that sees everything. So Odin was looking across all the 9 realms to see where Loki was. And he spotted him flying towards Asgard at great speed. And he also saw this eagle chasing him. And immediately he instructed everyone to pull out wood and wood shavings and line them up outside the walls of Asgard. And at his word, and he would tell them, they had to light those shavings and set it on fire, right? And at great speed, Loki just came flying in and hurtled and dived into the walls of Asgard with the nut. And the eagle was very, very close, and Odin immediately asked for the fire to be lit up. And as the fire started blazing, the eagle, he was so fast that he couldn't stop himself, so he went straight into the fire, and he burnt his wings and fell in torment. And meanwhile, Loki had just escaped that fire. He went into Asgard, and then he took out the falcon skin, and he chanted the runes so that Idun turned from the nut back into the goddess. And by this time, all the gods had gathered around her, and they were all looking weary and haggard and tired. And Idun looked at them and said, oh, you're all looking so tired. We need to do something about this. And started to hand out the golden apples she had in a basket to each one of them. And so the story ends. Artie, would you like to come back now?
Yes, I'm just let me get my video back on here. Yay, thank you so much for that story.
Can you... Okay, let me just refresh my screen because I think there's a problem with the connection from my end.
Sorry, everyone. We'll just wait for Gary to come back in 1 second here.
Hi, Artie.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi. Yeah, I can hear you now. The
Yay,
screen is
okay,
just-
so we could hear you the whole time. At least I could.
Okay, that's great. That's
so
great.
I think it's being recorded as well.
Okay, that's good.
So thank you for that story. It was even better the second time. So to start, I guess I'll ask the usual question I've been asking when we do these stories, which is, where do you enter into that story? Where does that story grip you?
It's just one of the things that strikes me when we kind of pick these stories from really ancient times is that there's a lot of back and forth between the characters of the story. There's anger, there's sort of revenge, there's attacking and attacking back, there's battling and conflicts and all sorts of things. But they don't really explain to you why the conflict, the root of the conflict in the first place. Just conflict just exists for its own sake. And in a very strange way, even when we're talking about battles and conflicts, really no guilt and blame and sort of finger wagging and this person's right and this person's wrong. I mean, is the giant wrong to ask for the apples? Is Loki wrong to steal it? Are the gods to have it or wrong to lose it? I mean, you can't really argue on any side. There is no right or wrong. It just is. There's just the thought of trying to have the apples, trying to control these apples. It just keeps thing from one place to another, but really there's just no blaming, fault finding, which I think is absolutely fascinating with these ancient stories. So that really caught my attention again.
I love that. I love that. I love that in the sense that, of course, I have my lens on how I think about it, but I think hearing you talk, it also makes me think that what I love about these stories is that they are so archetypal in the sense that they represent these patterns that are human, right? That happen to spring up through different ethnic and cultural sort of traditions. And they are diverse, right? But when you do find similarities and commonalities, there's just something there that is not really expressible in words. There is no reason, right? It's like, what is, you can ask why forever, but at the end of the day, you backstop into this sense of, this is, it just is, right? It just is, which is the archetypal level. Like when we talk about archetypes, right, in retreats or these discussions, I typically will use like a number as an example, right? And at the end of the day, an archetype is a pattern that is invisible, right? But that guides the sort of structure and shape of reality all around it. You see it through its imprint. And a classic example is the example of number. So no one has ever seen, for example, the number 3. Right, you've seen 3 apples. You've seen the squiggle 3, or in Chinese, right, the squiggles of 3. You can conceptualize the sort of concept of 3, and yet you've never seen it. It is a pattern that is literally invisible. And yet, if you could even imagine this, if you removed 3 from the structure of reality, everything would fall apart, right? Nothing would exist. There's nothing without this pattern of 3. And so you can ask all day, why is it 3? Why is 3 before 4 and after 2? And after a certain point, right, everything calms down where it's like things are as they are, and you get this stillness. And so I think for me, in terms of, especially in sacred space, how to read the story, how to interpret it, blah, 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 all these things we do. So we'll still do that because it's fun and for no good reason, right? Out of delight. But before we do that, I would just say that this feeling of like these stories coming to us, where there is no reason why any of this stuff happens, but even as like, it's like a dream. When you start the story, you feel like you've dropped in with no context. You can't remember how you got there. You're like one day, Loki, Odin, and Honir, decided to go to Midgard, and it's like everything before that you don't remember. It's like a dream. It just starts in the middle of nowhere. The whole thing starts for no good reason. You picked the story for no good reason. We're definitely doing these live sacred space sessions for no good reason. And there's something in your comment that sort of touches the jugular of, I think what the Buddhists call like the isness of it, right? The Tathagata, right? This feeling of it just is. And after that, we can talk about all the drama and sound and fury and everything. But before that, right, the calm before the storm is kind of the seed that holds everything, right? Everything is contained in that moment. It's like when some people describe, right, the sound Om, right, in meditation. And they describe it as, in English, it would be like A-U-M, right? Aum, and how it contains every sound, in theory, right? And then consonants that cut the sounds are basically cutting the whole sort of thing of Om. And so that's a whole other conversation. But this idea that there is this single sound that is everything, and then all the other sounds are like basically footnotes or pieces, fragments of this sound, Om. And what I love about thinking about this is that it is often described as the 4-part sound or the 4-syllable sound. So it's like A-U-M, right? So those are the 3. And then the 4th syllable, right, is the silence that underpins it, right? It's the silence that begins before you make the sound and the silence that ends at the end of the last syllable. And that's why it's 4 syllables, because just because you're not like doing drama with it at the 3-syllable level doesn't mean it's not there. And in fact, without it, there would not be anything. Can I hear you? Are you there? Okay, well, I can't hear you now. Oh, there you are. There you are. Oh, you're on mute. Okay. Good. Okay. You went back into the silence. Gary, come back. Okay, so thank you. That's how I reacted. I love that. And then now with that sort of preamble, we're kind of done. That's basically all there is to say. We can stop and go home now, but we will carry on for no good reason, out of pure delight and fun, and talk about some of the symbols of the story as well. Should we do that?
Yeah. So what's the whole deal with feeling hungry in Midgard and eating an ox, and what's the deal with eating apples and things like that? It is just so loaded with symbols that you don't know what to start. Yeah.
Totally. And all these symbols are at the level of isness, right? This is the way stuff is set up. In the Norse worldview, but also when you look at it, you're like, okay, what insights can we glean for ourselves too, right? Sort of like 1,000 years later. So before I jump in, I want to jump in. I'll start by, for those of you who are new, who haven't been in these sessions with us before. So the way we read these stories, the way we read dreams and our healing work, the way we read everyday sort of events, even in the real world around us. our tendency and our bias is to read dreams, myths, fairy tale, symbol, mythopoetically. And that's just basically a fancy way of saying the way we read a story like this, the Apples of Idun, is to regard every major actor in the story as more or less a symbol of a different part of your own inner self. A different part of the world, but when you think outside, you kind of divorce yourself from it, because I'm like separate. I'm like this poor little, sort of victim of sort of the gods and circumstance. But when we turn it inward, mythopoetically, and we say, Loki is a symbol of a part of us. Odin is a symbol of a part of us. The eagle and the giants are symbols of part of us. The apple is definitely a symbol of a part of us. And Idun herself is a symbol of a part of us. What we do then is we shine the spotlight on our internal world so that we kind of regain that sense of, ownership, sovereignty, oneness, solidarity with the things going on in the story. And we don't just say, well, whatever, that has nothing to do with me. All of it has something to do with you. In exactly the same way that, your liver is different from your heart, is different from your eyes and your lungs. But, ideally, they all work together in harmony. And to the extent that they don't and there's conflict, we have a problem. We have a problem, right? So here, there's so many interesting features in the story. So the first is that, so we can talk about appetite and Midgard and the oxen and everything. The number one thing that really jumped out at me are these apples of Idun, right? And the thing about these apples, as the story tells us, is that these are the artifacts, the objects. This is the force within you. The golden apple within you is the thing that makes the gods the gods. Without the apples, the gods, it's not clear if the gods actually die, but they definitely do not stay youthful, right? I think the story said when he went to Freya, Freya's hair had all fallen out and her face was like a pouch, right? So everything is like, drooping, all the youthfulness is gone because these apples have been taken out of the realm. So it makes the symbol of apples very, very interesting, right? These apples are key. And the natural question this begs is, what are these apples symbolically? Or put another way, what is it that makes a god a god? Okay. And this to me is a very revealing thing. This is like a neon sign in the story. So there's something, this factor, right? These apples, these golden apples, that itself maintains immortality and godliness. So what is an apple? What is a golden apple? In many systems and traditions, the apple is a symbol of wisdom, right? So in the Norse system, obviously, in the Greek system, the apples of Hesperides, even in the Judeo-Christian system, right? In Genesis, in the Garden of Eden, the sort of main football, right? The hot potato that's thrown around there is the apple from the tree of knowledge. And in the Genesis story, one of the reasons, right, the God of Abraham, right, Yahweh, banished Adam and Eve from the garden, is that there was concern that now they've eaten of the tree of knowledge. If they also ate of the second tree, from the tree of immortality, then they would become like gods. And this was like not the plan, and we don't want this happening, right? We don't know why this is a problem if we became like gods, but apparently, that was like unacceptable, and we were banished from the garden. So apples are wisdom, number one, wisdom. But secondly, they are also nourishment, because apples are kind of food. And in dreams, when you see food, it is a kind of spiritual nourishment, emotional nourishment, not necessarily biological, right? Sort of. So when you are in a dream and you're like looking for food and you can't find food and you're hungry, it's not necessarily a sign of like physically in the world you don't have food, but that you're starved of nourishment. And typically in a dream, it translates into emotional and spiritual nourishment. Your spiritual and emotional needs are not being met at some level. So here, the apple is this spiritual and an emotional nourishment that comes from wisdom. And the last and third factor of this apple is that it is golden. So in dreams and myth, gold typically symbolizes insight, right? So in fairy tales, when you see money in the form of currency or cash, that will typically symbolize ego power. But gold itself is insight, right? So you're like, well, what about gold currency, gold coins? That shows up much more rarely. Typically, in my practice so far, I probably read like 9,000 dreams over the past, several years in my advising practice, right? So I just, in my own practice, I've seen gold coins like very, very infrequently when my advisees report their dreams back. But that would be a sort of insight and ego power fused into one sort of part of you. Okay. So wisdom, nourishment, and insight. Golden apple. So a golden apple to me, right, is a symbol of nourishing wisdom that imparts insight, right? Nourishing wisdom that imparts insight. And typically in the realm of the sacred, because the apples are of the realm of Asgard, which is like the sort of high realm. So nourishing wisdom that imparts insight, kind of like live sacred space on a good day. On a good day, right? When we're going and we're firing all pistons, golden apples comes up, right? And one of the things that happens when you take a bite of a golden apple and you intake nourishing wisdom that imparts insight, is that it is generative, it is restorative, it is rejuvenating, right? So when we do these live sacred space sessions, if it has gone well, if you have felt the live sacred space, the sacred space of it, if you have been for a couple of hours in this state more or less of being devoid of fear, threat, and control, and you take in insights that are just like playful insights, we're just kicking the ball around, having fun for no good reason. It's not, this is the insight, and you better do this when you leave this live sacred space and go out into the world. Peace be with you. Stay out of trouble, right? Not like that. When it's like, let's just have fun together and enjoy the sacred space together and enjoy the nourishment of the sacred space together. What happens when you leave the sacred space, right? It puts you in a state of rejuvenation, in a state of quote unquote youthfulness, which simply means you have energy, you have vision, you have newness, freshness, innovation, and the ability in youthfulness to procreate, right? And mythopoetically, procreation doesn't necessarily mean like biological children, but it means generativity, right? It means creativity. It means you start getting downloads, insights, and you start, whatever it is you do. If you're a painter, you just start painting. To be generative as an artist, for instance, means you are prolific in your art. The elder Picasso in his 80s was still very youthful, right? Artists in this mode are always youthful and giggling, and they're playful, right? And people like half their age are like, oh, I can't even keep up with the old man, right? Monks, like the Dalai Lama and all these sort of reverend guru monks, you often see them and they're giggling, they're laughing. What makes them so, right? What makes them so youthful? I mean, they have aches and pains. They have things they need to go to the hospital for. And to me, it is these golden apples. It's the nourishing wisdom that imparts insight. Where you have the wisdom, you sit with it, you digest it, you absorb it, it becomes a part of you, right? When you eat something, if I eat an apple, the apple doesn't exist anymore and it becomes me, right? That is what consumption and eating means. You are what you eat. So it's not necessarily knowledge and intellect, but it is nourishing wisdom that imparts insight. Someone who is in an embodied state of wisdom can be 90 years old and overflowing with energy that then pours off of them and nourishes everyone around them. Okay. And so in a word, that is what these golden apples symbolize for me. And so when we talk about this story, we are talking about high stakes here, right? We're talking about this divine football or soccer ball of the apples that are getting stolen out of Asgard. And what are we going to do? We're no longer gods without these apples. We die without these apples. So it's high stakes, but it's also this kind of sacred, profane dichotomy here, right? Because we talk about sacred space here. Clearly, Asgard is the realm of the sacred. although it's Norse, so there's like Loki and there's all this sort of drama. So there is some fear, threat, and control. Loki's afraid of being punished, right? But generally, you can take it as this sort of Elysian kind of, Avalon-ish realm of sacred wisdom, sacred insight, gods drinking ambrosia, et cetera, et cetera. In the Celtic tradition, Avalon, right, is the Isle of Apples, right? Ava in Celtic is the V is a P when it turns to like English. So if you were to pronounce it our way, it would be Apollon, right? It was the Isle of Apples. And of course, Avalon is where King Arthur sort of retired to after his death to live in eternity with the fairies and nymphs all around him. And so the one who is the keeper of the apples is Idun, this goddess who is described to be like a child, who there's war and ravage and savagery all around her in the world, and she is completely, it's not that she's in denial, but she is just in this other state. She is gullible. Loki can like trick her very easily. And it's very interesting when you think about the gambit Loki uses to trick her. He doesn't trick her with fear, threat, or control. He doesn't say, oh my gosh, fire, come with me, we have to get out of here. He says, dear Idun, right, did you know I found this tree in Midgard, and I think it has like apples that look like your golden apples. And I wonder, and it's like this enthusiasm, this like, oh my God, this nerdy kind of like, oh my gosh, this is so fun. Do you want to come check this out with me? And he knows, Loki is the trickster, right? He knows how to push everyone's buttons. And he knows like innately, when you are encountering Idun, you don't go to her with fear, threat, and control. It's not going to work, right? What does work with nourishing insight that imparts, nourishing wisdom that imparts insight, what does work is this feeling of wonder, right? Is this feeling of enthusiasm and curiosity? Is this feeling of the sacred, not the profane? There's a detail here where when we were brainstorming, we looked up the goddess Idun, and it turns out like she is also the wife in the Norse system. She's the wife of the god of poetry, which I found to be so beautiful. Because poetry, of course, is the language of the sacred, right? Poetry is the practice of expressing what is inexpressible, right? Another way of putting it from something we were discussing earlier in this conversation is like poetry is a kind of archetypal language, right? It will show you things, it will express things, and will not have to explain why or give like a 10 bullet point sort of PowerPoint slide to back itself up. It simply expresses, and you hear it, and a part of you knows the truth of it. So the other thing about Idun is that she is kind of this like hippie flower child, right? She's not a witch goddess. She's not a sort of seductress, nor is she a goddess of strategy and war. She seems defenseless and innocent, but somehow turns out okay, right? Even when the giants and the eagles take her away, there's like no hint of like, oh, she was harmed and she was sort of injured or frightened. She was just like, it's Idun. Like no one, even though she's not scary and she does not wield fear, threat, and control, everyone seems to know to not mess with Idun. Something about this aspect of the inner feminine holds the key to nourishing wisdom that imparts insight, and something about, I would say, most dimensions and aspects of the realm, right? So all the sort of realms are sort of symbolic of different regions within you. Kind of innately understand that like you're not to mess with this part. This is like the thing that will give you everything, and you can't force it. You can't force it. And so right there, all of these together, in addition, by the way, are kind of to me like a neon sign reinforcing the idea that these golden apples are of the realm of the sacred. These apples accrue to her, right? There's not some tree necessarily that she owns, because you could steal the tree from her. The apples just kind of come to her because of the nature of who she is. You could say she is the apple, right? And the other sort of interesting thing is that she gives them out for free. She gives them out for free. Even Freya, the queen of heaven, is beholden to her access to these apples. So in the realm of fear, threat, or control, Idun could easily come to the negotiating table and negotiate where I will be the queen of heaven if you want to stay youthful and generative. And Freya might sort of succumb to that, right? So she has the power to be the queen of heaven as the holder of these golden apples, but she is not, because her innate nature is to not be in this mode of avarice, ambition, fear, threat, and control. And there's something sort of mysterious about how this very aspect of her nature is connected to the fact that she is the one who gets the golden apples and no one else, right? She's just doing her thing, following her innate nature. And she doesn't fear the eagle, the giants, Odin, anyone. Right? There's war raging all around her, and she's just happy in her garden. Now, the giant / eagle, of course, comes from the realm of fear, threat, and control, scheming to get a hold of her. Right? So in the Greek system, this giant would be like a titan, right? So the Olympians versus the titans. In the Hindu system, this giant would be like an Ashura, right? Where it's like the Devas versus the Ashuras. They're constantly battling, scheming against each other. And so this gambit of the eagle, right, triggering and activating Loki, the trickster, the one who's like the hinge between the two realms, and we've had whole sessions on the trickster in past sessions, and you can access them through the replays. It's this feeling of the profane trying to get a hold of this golden apple power from the sacred. And they are able to do it, but only for a little while, but then it eventually fails. Right? So it's the realm of the profane trying to take this thing which is intrinsic to the realm of the sacred and to then bring it back into the kind of more inappropriate place. So when you look at the physics, there's no law that says she has to be in Asgard, right? The thing that brings her back to Asgard is her innate nature, right? Her nature is sacred, so she naturally reverts back to the sacred. Let me try to sort of explain this a different way. For me, one of the things I teach is meditation. I've been meditating since I was a little kid. And generally, I feel really good when I meditate. So when I'm in that sacred space solo on my own, I get golden apples when I meditate. Insights, nourishing wisdom that imparts insight come to me when I'm meditating, when I'm sort of doing reflections, even when I'm sleeping and I'm dreaming, right? When I'm in these sacred spaces all throughout the course of my day. Now, this giant coming up. Now, remember, this giant eagle is a part of you too. As much as Idun is a part of you, as much as Odin is a part of you, as much as Loki is a part of you. So there's a giant part of me that says, well, this is really great. I love this feeling when I say meditate. And now I want to capture this feeling, right? And the impulse, now there's nothing intrinsically wrong with this. It's a matter of degrees. Everything can be overdone, right? But this impulse is like, now I want to capture this feeling, right? I tried meditation. I really liked it the first time. Now I'm reading all this stuff online. I'm trying to capture more, wrap my head around this meditation thing. And now I say, now I'm going to have a morning ritual. I'm going to meditate 20 more minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the evening. I'm going to push hard, try to meditate for like 40 minutes, 2 hours, 6 hours, go to these retreats. Maybe I'll get so good, I'll try to sell meditation, right, in the commercial market. Or I'll come up with some device that guarantees this feeling by like manipulating your brainwaves. Now, this is the impulse of the giant. And the finer point is that this is not necessarily a bad thing, right? And the hint to this is that when the giant takes Idun to his mountain, the apples don't stop working, right? The apples don't wither and turn into dust. The apples actually work. The giant gets the benefit of the apples. But there's something interesting in that he's like, kind of tight and clenched about like, ha ha ha, now like I'm going to teach those Asgardians a lesson as well, which is kind of intrinsically not of the nature of the apples, right? So there's this friction there where it's like you hold this temporarily, but it's not going to stay there for long. But it is fascinating that this object can be moved around. So when you take the apples out of their home, they still work. Okay, so when you lose the apples, it's not punishment because you are bad. If it was intrinsic punishment, the apples would just stop working. We just turn it off remotely, right? And so to go back to the meditation example, this happens all the time. So when you start meditating with a strict regimen, right? Half an hour in the morning, half an hour at night, regular schedule, tracking my brain waves, getting my phone and my watch to like track all this stuff. It's not intrinsically wrong, but often it doesn't end up feeling as good and it's hard to keep up. Okay. And the natural question is, why is that? Why is that? And the reason for that is the act of something like meditation is a sacred space, which is by definition a realm devoid of fear, threat, or control. And it's that absence of fear, threat, and control by which the apples come up in the first place. Okay. Idun is the only one in Asgard where when Loki comes up to her, everyone else is like, oh, Loki, what do you want? Like, watch my wallet, you're going to pick my pocket, right? And Idun's like, hey, bro, what's up? She's just like, no, like we call it gullible. That's the shamey word for it. But it's like she's always in the realm of the sacred, right? So when you tighten with control, saying, I have to have a good meditation this time. I have to meditate 3 times a day. I have to be more spiritual. I have to improve myself. That is clenched fear, threat, and control. And that is why it doesn't work after a while, because you're constricting the realm of the sacred within you that is categorically the very definition of meditation itself. Right? Meditation is Idun, and you're trying to bring her into the realm of fear, threat, and control by regimenting it. And then, of course, the folks who are real sort of angry giants will tighten the noose even more by saying, well, I don't know why this isn't working. It should work. So we'll do a clinical trial, right? Or we'll try to come up with a pill so that even if you're stressed and you're like in full giant mode, you can take the pill and it will just put you into that meditative state. And I'm in Silicon Valley. There are people running around all over here trying to do exactly that, to hack meditation. They sometimes come and find me and ask me to advise their companies. And I don't have much to say. I just very politely decline, right? When you try to cinch down on meditation, and then when it doesn't work, it's not a punishment because you haven't done anything wrong, right? The giant hasn't done anything wrong by wanting the golden apples in their realm. It doesn't work not because he's being punished. It doesn't work just because it's the physics of the thing, right? And that, to me, from the story, is another insight from reading this story. Okay, so over controlling the benefits of the sacred just is not a sustainable strategy. Another way of putting it. Next, I want to talk a little bit about Loki, right? So another interesting thing for me then is the mechanism of how the profane even is able to, the giant realm, the profane realm. Like, what are the mechanics of even doing this, bank robbery, right? Where you get in and even get the golden apples for a little bit. We're like, okay, so getting the golden apples into the giant realm isn't going to work. Eventually they'll revert back to Asgard, fine. But how does it even happen in the first place that this transfer happens? And the answer is through Loki, right? And more specifically, Loki as the symbol here of hunger and appetite. Hunger and appetite. So the gods come to Midgard. And why do they come to Midgard? Just to play around, for no good reason, out of curiosity, wonder, and delight, right? Which is the best reason to do anything. Then they get hungry. and their hunger is specifically for meat. And they find an ox and they slaughter the ox. Now, in many traditions, the Greek tradition, other traditions, when the gods actually eat meat, they become mortal, right? The god part of you becomes hungry, right? And that's when the profane comes in and works the hinge, right? Because of your appetite, you enter into the realm of fear, threat, and control, where it's like, oh, we better get this ox, on the fire before it's dark because we're not going to be able to eat, right? And then the conflict with the eagle over this thing is all fear, threat, and control. So the God part of you becomes hungry, and that's when the profane comes in, the eagle, and is able to work the hinge, right? And the hinge is the trickster himself. The joint is Loki, the trickster. In the Greek system, Hermes, right? In the Native American system, Coyote or Hoyote, right? In the tribal stories of Hoyote, he's always getting into trouble because of his appetite. He's stealing food and he gets in trouble. He looks, there are berries above his head, and he sees the reflections of the berries in the river, and he jumps in and hits his head on a rock and is knocked out, right? So appetite is always the thing that ends up getting you in trouble. The giant, right, the agent of the profane, is an eagle, interestingly. So an eagle is, it's an animal, so it's a symbol of embodiment. It's a bird, so it's an agent of the air. So it is this embodied spiritual kind of part of you, and is also of the solar realm. Eagles, Apollo, in the United States, right, our national bird is an eagle, is the solar of the right, righteous, and often bully presence, right? The American sort of space missions to the moon were, of this country of the eagle were obviously, named Apollo, right? And that was not a mistake. It was this sort of almost hubristic sort of feeling of we're on the right, we're this bully presence, we police the world, et cetera, et cetera. It is this part of us that places glory and honor at the expense of everything else. And the eagle then here is what prevents the appetite from being satisfied, right? It keeps your stuff from cooking and being digestible and nourishing. And these are all parts of you, right? It's like the you is the overall. Odin and Loki are a part of you. The eagle is a part of you. The apples are a part of you. When we hit play on this sort of diorama, it's just this, you're watching the physics of how these inner parts of you are interacting. To gain, again, on a good day in sacred space, nourishing wisdom that imparts insight so that you can be rejuvenated. So Odin then is confronted with this, and he agrees to share. He's wise, he's balanced. He's like, okay, well, you can take some. The eagle comes in and takes too much, right? So the eagle comes in our lives in early life and says, you don't get any nourishment until I get my share. The eagle is solar, righteous, bully. You could also say prestige. You could also say the straight and narrow. You can also say worrying about what the world thinks about you, because glory and honor are number one, as opposed to like your natural nature, as opposed to your bliss and what you really love to do. So you go off and you become an investment banker, an accountant, right? You go, instead of, doing whatever you want, you end up, working for a big, tech company because of the prestige or whatever, right? And that's fine. The whole point of seeing the pattern in a story like this is not to say, you dumb slob, why did you make that mistake? It's to say, this is archetypal. Everybody does this. This is the way it happens, right? This is the way it happens. So the eagle comes in, takes way too much, right? It's like, okay, I thought I'd do investment banking for a few years and then make money and then go be a painter. But now I'm like, I'm like way past midlife and I'm still a banker because I'm addicted to the money and the prestige. The eagle takes too much. Well, the gods can find another ox, but not in this story because it's set up in this way. And then the one that becomes enraged is Loki, the trickster in you, right? Where one part of you is like, this is fine, while the eagle is taking too much. And the trickster is the one that says, no. And he is the agent of transformation, right? In the alchemical In the alchemical system, it is Mercury, which is another name for Hermes, which is another name for Loki, Quicksilver. That is the agent that gets the transformation going, right, in the cooking pot of transformation. So Loki blows up. He becomes enraged, and he jams his staff, right, because he's hungry and he's been deprived for too long, right, because the eagle of prestige is eating up all your life force, the ox, and the other parts of you are not getting any, right? So your creative part, the part that wants to get on with your bliss. So that the agent of transformation comes in with you, comes into the picture and jabs the thing really hard. Now his staff gets stuck, he gets dragged all over. And this is someone like the Prince Buddha sticky hair story that I tell in some of the mythic series that we do for advisees, or even Brer Rabbit, right? And so to get out of this, to get unstuck from the situation, he promises to bring the sacred into the profane. So it's like, I can't do this job anymore. I've got to get out. And the job bites back and takes you for a ride and says, no. What if we make less than this extravagant amount of money? We're going to lose all our friends. All our friends are at this level. Our family is not going to want to be with us anymore. We'll be in shame. Who are we even? We'll lose our sense of identity, all these other things. And you say, all right. We will bring the sacred into the profane. Let's set up in the profane workplace where I have this toxic boss, breathing down my neck all day long. And the entire work environment is soaked in fear, threat, and control. Let's bring in a meditation teacher and have meditation at noon every Thursday. That'll fix things. Let's bring the golden apples into the profane, and that will make everything okay. Right? So, when people ask me about doing consulting for corporate, there's nothing wrong with it, but there's a reason I don't do that. Because it's tough to be the agent who tries to sort of transfer the golden apples from the realm of the sacred into the profane. I mean, can you imagine me being, at a Google or a Goldman Sachs and saying, we want to create a space devoid of fear, threat, and control, right? It would be like ludicrous. It would be absurd. And that's why temples are separate from marketplaces, right? And it's not good or bad. I mean, I use Google products. I probably use Golden products, right? But it is a question of just the inherent physics of the thing, right? It's not one is better or worse, right or wrong, but it's just looking at the physics at this archetypal level, right? It is what it is. These physics don't change through the eons of human experience. So we all have a Loki within us. We all have an eagle within us too. It is this sense of appetite and hunger to say, I want to feel this meditation feeling all the time. And I want prestige and I want to make money all the time. I want both, right? What I really want is I want to feel this thing devoid of fear, threat, and control and rejuvenating for me, right? And get my work done and work too much and have a perfect body and have prestige and money and all the while not have fear, threat, and control and have this wonderful meditation feeling all the time. That's why in the profane world, we try to come up with a pill. So it can be mechanized, right? Or a headband that you wear, so it can be mechanized. In other words, you want to be able to feel like this even when you are doing things in the profane. Okay. And there's an intrinsic challenge and difficulty there, right? But that doesn't stop the ego from trying, right? Now, go in the other extreme. If you didn't need to do things in the profane, if you didn't need to eat or pay taxes or pay for food and your shelter and everything, you could lie in bed and meditate all day, right? Like a monk. Now, what brings you out of that? Because you could say, I could say no to the world and just meditate all day if I wanted. The thing that does bring you back out into the world is your Loki, is your appetite, right? Your appetite brings you out in the world to work, to look for food, to look for love, to look for emotional validation. And your appetite is the thing that gets you into trouble. You want the golden apples, you can do that for a little bit, but the gods know to go back to Asgard and spend more time there. Right? So this goes back to what I'm always saying about the sacred and profane. In our modern world, it's like 99% profane, 1% sacred, if that. And the thing I always say about that state of affairs is there's nothing intrinsically bad with that, right? If you're 99 profane, 1% sacred, and you're okay with that, carry on, no action needed. There is no finger wagging here. But the goal for me as my own kind of trickster, right, is to get you to taste the golden apple of the sacred and say, yeah, if you like that, you can do more of that, but you don't have to. But if you wanted to, here's how, right? And because I'm coming from the sacred, so I'm not going to say the sacred is good for you, you better do it. I'm like, here, taste this. Do you like it? And if you want, you can have more. Okay. And so it is for you as your own sovereign person, right? The sort of ruler of your inner realm of all these different parts, to decide for yourself how much of your life is sacred or profane. It's completely up to you. And no one's going to tell you you're right or wrong. But so the appetite is the thing that seizes us, that leads us to try these extreme measures to bring the apples of the sacred into the profane as permanently, as sustainably as possible. In a way, you could say the nourishing wisdom that imparts insight from a story like this, right, could be, why are you in the giant realm anyway? Right? How much time do you spend in the eagle giant realm? 99% of the time. Why is that? Or why are you in Midgard anyway? If you're actually hungry, why don't you just go back to Asgard? Why don't you just go back to the sacred? Right. So it's not just Asgard to the giant realm. It's even Asgard to Midgard, which is the earth realm. Right. So even the gods have this appetite. They want to stay in Midgard because they're partying and having a good time, and they want to satisfy their appetite. They can instantly go back to Asgard and drink their ambrosia, but they want to stay. They're camping, they're slumming it, whatever, and they want to stay. Right. Said another way, the easiest way to fill up and sustain is to leave the profane, go back into the sacred, and fill your tank up, and then come back down. Right. That is an example of perhaps a piece of nourishing wisdom that imparts insight, a golden apple that comes from this story that is fed to us. Okay. But this is not a finger wagging thing. Even the gods, even Odin, comes to Midgard for amusement and doesn't want to leave, wants to eat here, and deals with all of this. So it's not bad. It can be painful, but archetypally, when you see it at this archetypal level, it just becomes this very, very lovely thing. Okay, so I think those are the comments I had. Gary, do you want to come back up and add your 2 cents? Let me know if you have questions or other thoughts. Let's see. All right, Gary, where are you? All right, let me try to invite you here. Okay, I think she's refreshing. Okay, while she's doing that, let me see what else I have from my notes here. So there is this one thing I wanted to share from the Hindu system of the Devas and Asuras on how these things interact. Hi, Gary.
Hi. Can you
hear me okay?
Yeah. Yeah,
okay.
This is fine. I had trouble logging back. All right.
Yeah, no problem. So what do you have to say? Do you have more to add?
Yeah, I mean, I loved this, like I said, the back and forth of how the sacred moves from Asgard to Midgard to Jotunheim, and in our terms, from sacred to profane. And something about that story reminded me of a similar dynamics in a Hindu mythological story. Although, you wouldn't think of it right at the outset because the details are very different, right? So, a story where there's this conflict between devas and asuras over pretty much everything, right? So, if you read Hindu mythology, you always have asuras attacking devas. Asuras are like the demons, and devas are the gods. So you have this conflict. They're constantly attacking, constantly trying to grab power from the devas, and you can call it this whole power grabbing thing. But there comes a point where the devas and asuras are churning the ocean. The divine ocean, of course, the ocean of milk. And they're using this mountain and the divine serpent as the actual churning tools. So they churn the ocean for goodies, and all sorts of goodies come out. And they all take their pick, right? When and they find something, they said, I'll take this and I'll keep this. And finally, this bowl of elixir, this divine nectar that comes, which, if you consume, you become immortal. So it is the thing that makes devas immortal. So when that comes out, immediately everyone wants a piece of it. Everyone wants it, right? And how do we, how do we decide who gets to have it? And so, the devas, of course, still fighting it out. And then Vishnu, decides to come in the form of a woman and says, I will settle this dispute and I will make sure everyone gets a share.
So this is Vishnu.
And this is Vishnu, and he's the one. He's also the kind of trickster in our mythology, right? So he does get things done, in a clever way. So he comes in disguise. He becomes this beautiful, mesmerizing woman, and he says, I will make sure everyone gets a share. And he asks the devas to line up on one side and the asuras to line up on the other side. And he says, I will go one by one and give out a part of this, and so you can all have it. And the asuras are just so mesmerized by his beauty that they just say yes to everything. They're just gaping at him, at her, with their mouths open, and they're not questioning anything. They're not wondering what's going on. And more.
I mean, that happens. That happens.
So basically, Vishnu just goes around, distributing this nectar to the devas. And the trick is that by the time he reaches the asuras, it'll all be finished.
It'll be gone, right?
So that's the thing. But one asura kind of catches on to this, realizes there's something fishy here. He switches the line and goes and stands in the line with the devas, right? I mean, not to go into the entire story, but basically that reminded me of how this eagle comes into Midgard and watches over the gods eating this ox and says, you're not going to have it until I've had my share. So I need my share as well. And it doesn't really come across if the giant was hungry himself. It's almost like, if you're going to have something, I want a share of it too. In the same way, the Hindu story, you're not really sure why the conflict is. Like, it's almost like the asura saying, we're not going to let the gods get away with anything. They're going to have something nice, we want a share of it too. So it's that kind of it's almost that the way they ask for it almost disqualifies them from it. Right?
Interesting.
It's not they want the sacred for the sake of the sacred. It's like, I want it because I must have it.
Right.
And that almost kind of pushes them out of that realm. So that's what it reminded me of. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess that makes me want to share this thing about so even in that story, right? The devas are a part of us,
Yeah.
and the asuras are a part of us.
Yeah.
And I guess the way I think about that is we can think about the devas and asuras as like these beings where it's like, well, what did the asuras do to the devas that made them so like inferior and they're always fighting and everything?
Yeah.
And it would be kind of like asking the question of like, what is it that makes, I don't know, whatever tension? You know, what did the body ever do to the brain where the brain now has this blood-brain barrier and doesn't let blood actually into the brain? Like what, you know, what was the backstory behind that? Who did what to whom? And it's like, well, no, when you look at it as like the systems thing where they're part of the same system, they play different roles. It looks like conflict, right? But but it actually isn't. So in the case of like devas and asuras, actually, let me try and pull up my, let me do a screen share real quick here. So let me do this. Can you see that?
Yes. Yes, I can.
Yeah, okay. All right, let me see if my, oh, I don't think my pen will work. Okay, sorry. Let me do it this way. Okay, you can see my entire screen now, yeah?
Yes.
Hello?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, you can see my
Awesome.
entire screen. Okay, so let me turn my, you there?
Yes.
Okay.
I kind of disable the video so you can share the screen.
Oh, no, that's fine. So basically, there's this thing called the Bhava chakra, right? And those of you who have done the clarity study group, meditation study group with me will know this. This is this will be very familiar because I harp on this a lot in that program. So this is Bhava chakra. And this is the wheel chakra of being and becoming. So I won't go through this whole thing. And those of you who have done clarity have had it with this. You're sick of this by now. But basically, every slice of this pie is a state of being and becoming. So the highest here, and the wheel always turns basically in this direction, in this clockwise direction. So the devas are here. The devas are the Olympians, the highest. Deva is the word we get our word divine from. And Deva is also where we get our word devil and demon, right? These are not seen as, like in the Hindu system, there is good and evil, but it's like, oh, there are these different factors. They're all parts of you. We don't completely take something like in the Judeo-Christian system, like the devil, and completely demonize it and say, that's not me at all. Where like Jesus like doesn't even let them talk, right? And it's this complete cutting off. It's like, it's a little bit more give and take in the other systems. So this is the Deva realm. And then the next realm down is the Ashura realm. Okay. And this is the Preta realm, the Naraka realm, the Tiragoni realm, and the Manusha realm. We won't talk, we've only got 25 minutes, so we're not going to do all that. But I guess the only thing I want to say here is when you say, so these are all states of you, right? Classically, you're saying this turns around. In the Buddhist system, also, it's like, well, if you are, you know, a Manusha, which is basically the human realm, and you do a good job, and you're, you know, you do your meditation, and you're a good person, when you die, you will upgrade into the Deva realm. Okay. And one of the sort of limitations of the Christian system is that it's like this linear thing. Like if you, once you get to heaven, that's it. It was, well, what happens after heaven? That's it. You just float around, you play your harp, and that's it. Whereas in these sort of older, more fully developed systems like the Hindu system, Um, time is not an arrow. Time is a cycle. So after the Deva realm, I mean, so let's say you get promoted to the Deva realm because you were like, Mother Teresa or Gandhi in this life. Congratulations, that's great. The wheel will continue turning. You will go back down to the Ashura realm. And it's not a question of merit. It's just how the wheel turns. It is archetypal. Okay. So the thing we talk about in like when we practice meditation around this is that you don't have to take these as like states of reincarnation. You can take these, you can take each slice of this as a symbol, mythopoetically, of a different part of your own inner self. Right? So when I'm feeling on top of the world, I'm in the Deva realm. When I'm angry and vengeful, I'm in the Ashura realm. When I'm hungry, I'm in the Preta realm. When I'm like depressed, I'm in the Naraka realm, and so on and so forth. Okay, and some people will have seasons of life when they're like this, and other people will be like, I can go all over this map over the course of like just an hour or a day. Right? It's very volatile, right? Very volatile. So, if I'm in the Deva realm or the Tiragoni realm right now, it's like weather versus climate. So right now I'm feeling like a Tiragoni, or I'm feeling depressed, or I'm feeling on top of the world. That's my weather today. But you can also characterize a person by their climate, where it's like this person, generally this wheel turns slow and easy, and they just kind of go through and it's no big deal. And other people, they're just like all over the map, like, every 5 minutes. So a person's climate or temperament, right, is the classic word, can be different. So the one detail I wanted to bring out here is that one of the mechanisms that creates Ashura is the fact that we are in Deva mode. And regardless of merit, regardless of anything, because you are on the wheel, all of existence is symbolized by this wheel. There is nothing off of it, right? You can't escape the wheel, no matter what, a high-tech astronaut billionaire would like to think, or, a sort of spiritual meditation person. I want to escape the round of life. It's like there is no escape from the wheel. This is reality. Okay. So you're here, you're on top of the world, and the wheel will continue to turn. Eventually, you will go down to Ashura. And the thing that makes you angry when you get into this is that you resist. You're trying to turn the wheel back. You're trying to have profane and all the fear, threat, and control of profane, and the nectar of the sacred, which is the nectar of being devoid of fear, threat, and control. So basically, you want fear, threat, and control and the fruits of that, and you want the fruits of not fear, threat, and control. And you're trying to jam those two things together. And it's not like you're an idiot or like you're a bad person. It's just like it doesn't work, right? It doesn't work. I can't make everything up, because in order for anything to be up, at least one thing has to be down, right? And if you try to make everything up, it's like, I'm not fighting you. I'm just waiting for you to like settle down, because it's just not possible, right? It's archetypally, it just doesn't work like that. So when you actually try to do that anyway and make the wheel metaphorically turn backwards, it doesn't work. You get frustrated. And that's exactly when you complete the drop down into this level. You become angry. You become vengeful. You become frustrated. And then you're like, oh, now I'm really hungry. I don't have the goal. I don't have the nourishment. And you go down into the Preta realm, which is characterized by hunger. So this is anger. This is hunger. This is depression. This is ignorance. This is sort of regular. This is like the human realm. So in many of these systems, not just the Norse system, the Hindu system, even in the Judeo-Christian system, these mechanics glimmer through the stories, and then we like shush them away and make things into this very linear thing. Okay. These all point to these like underlying archetypal just realities. It's just is the way it is. And the wisdom that comes from that is not to say if you want to be promoted to Deva, you will do this. It's like, no, you can do it or not, but there is this wheel and it will continue turning. And I mean, you can resist it. It's kind of fun to resist it sometimes, and you have all this drama, right? But if you know the underlying mechanics of the wheel, you can strategize as to like what you actually want to do, right? Because these two realms mirror each other exactly. The thing you want in the Deva is for it never to end, and it will end because the wheel will turn. The thing you feel in the Naraka is that it will never be better. This is rock bottom. I'm done. It will never be better. And yet the wheel continues turning, and it does get better. And so that's sort of another, I guess, golden apple, if you want to call it that. And then what's really interesting here is that there is this sense, right, where in all of these mandalic kind of circular things, like we know from Plato, right, the self is a circle. So this symbol of circle or cyclicality is like this deep, deep truth that comes up in a lot of different things. When you contrast that with the archetype of linearity, right? So it's this idea of like even the passage of time. So you can say, is time an arrow or is time a circle? Right? And they're very different archetypes. In the Western world, we tend to think of time as an arrow, right? Where it's like, it's progress, right? It's progress, and we're moving forward. Everything's getting better and better. And we're moving from where we are to this endpoint. We're moving to this final thing. Because, you know, the archetype is time is an arrow, and an arrow has certain physics. So when you think of your world as linear versus cyclical, right, there are these, this is an archetypal difference. And so when we do like archetypal manifestation on our retreats and everything, we try to figure out what is the implicit archetype of your life as you see it. What does that imply? And then do you like it? Are you okay with that? If you're not okay with that, then we navigate, we manifest into a different archetype. And it's a lot of mythopoetics, it's a lot of imagination, kind of reimagining your world and your life. So here's an example of a stark difference. If you think of your life, of all reality as linear, then you will get things like you're always looking to the future. You're never in the present moment, right? And you're always aimed at a goal, an arrow, which is not here, right? You're aimed at an end state that is not here, which is why in patriarchal societies, and in particular Judeo-Christian, Abrahamic, you know, basically the religions of the God of Yahweh, right? I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it's patriarchal, it's linear, phallic, it's more sort of masculine, right? So circular is more holistic and feminine, blah, blah, blah. We sort of can say all these things. But this is why in patriarchal societies, in the religious imagery, we often have this motif of apocalypse and end of days, right? Because we see time as linear, right? Whereas in the cyclical, it's like there is no end of days. In the Hindu system, nothing ends, right? Even at the end of the Kali Yuga, you go back to the first Yuga of 4 and everything begins again, right? Because that's just the way it is, right? It is endless. Or you're like, well, how about at the end of, you know, this Big Bang and the end of the universe? It's like, there will be another one. We may look and act and feel very different, but there is only one thing, and it's basically inhaling, exhaling forever. But when you don't see the circularity of it, the cyclicality of it, and you enforce through whatever wound or whatever, this linearity, you get to this endpoint, and there's this sense of apocalypse. So that's why in like, you know, the Western sort of Christian religions, you're wherever you are here. And afterwards, there's a straight line to the Devas or the straight line to hell. And then after that, there's no cyclical. That's it. You're done. Right? And a Hindu will like look at the Christian sort of system and be fascinated. And it's like, whoa, that's like a real sort of, that's an incredible drama. I mean, I know there will be stuff after that, but the fact that you're doing that is like, it's got to be a great trip. What are you smoking? Can I have some? Like, what's going on over there, right? But the thing is, like, when we think archetypally of time as a straight line, it implies this motif of apocalypse. And so with things like, in the 50s to the 80s, like nuclear Armageddon, right? We thought of this final thing where we're going to blow each other up. So what's the point anyway? And you're very not present, and you're very not centered, right? Even now with climate change, it's like we're like consuming and consuming. We don't see the cyclicality of it. We see disaster, fear, and punishment, and we fear this apocalyptic end of days around climate change. I mean, the fear is well-founded, right? But it's like archetypally, when you think in this way, when you expect this end of days thing to happen, it will happen because it's consistent with the overall archetype you're in. And you could also argue that your behavior here, right, where you're like not honoring the environment and not thinking about the future or whatever, is all part of this sort of linearity. Like when you're in a cyclical archetype, you know the thing will regenerate, so you anticipate it. Right? When I don't think of end of days, when I think of like, yeah, I'm going to have like, 100 generations of grandchildren after me, because it's cyclical and generative, then I really start planning for the future. Like every plastic bag I use could like cut my line down, right? And you start to reorder your world. I'm not saying we should do that, but I'm saying we don't do that, right? And it's like consistent in our modern world. So, I mean, this is exactly like the first session we did in March 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic, where we said, is the pandemic punishment for all of our sins, or is it transformation, right? And you could see it both ways, but when you look at it one versus look at the other, just like when you look at the world cyclically versus looking at the world linearly, there are differences in your behavior. There are differences in the insight you get. And then for me, it's like, my job is to present the two perspectives and then you choose, right? Two other differences here. We're running out of time. Cyclical is abundant. It's endless. It's inexhaustible, right? Whereas linear ends, right? Can you go in a straight line forever, or do you eventually go off a cliff? In our physical world, it's like there is nothing we go on forever. We're like, if you continue going straight on the earth, you'll eventually come back. So that's okay, but that's not linear anymore. You're looking at the larger archetype of the earth as cyclical, not linear. Right? So linear is like local, cyclical is like the more universal. And then the final difference here, I would say, is, and this is all consistent, right? And I'm not shaming, I'm not saying, it's just like you can choose. And there are issues with the cyclical archetype as well, in terms of what our life would be like if we really centered around that. But when time or existence is seen as linear, you're not focused on the present moment, because it can be anywhere in here. You're focused on this endpoint goal. So you're not present, but also you're not centered. Like you're not embodied. You're not in the center of where you are now, because you're always looking to the future. But also the nature of an arrow is that there is no center. Contrast this with the circle. There is a center. The center is right there, and you're circling around it. So you know who you are. You know where your center is. You know what you stand for. When you're constantly going forward into progress, nothing is sacred, literally, right? You'll crack any, I mean, I'm in Silicon Valley. I've lived this, right? You'll like disrupt any traditional institution, any institutional sort of cultural norm. Everything is on the table, because it doesn't matter. We're all leaving it behind anyway. It's all disposable, because we're all going forward in this direction, to the point where the billionaire winners of these things are still going in a straight line off the planet, right? Literally trying to leave the sort of circle of the earth archetypally. And again, is that good or bad? It's like, it's not really the way I would want to live. It's kind of why I left tech in the first place. But when you look at the archetypal sort of roots of this, it becomes very clear. Being locked in a linear archetype, of course, it's the devil you know versus the devil you don't, right? So it's being locked in a linear archetype as we are now, we can see every day all of the disadvantages, but you can call it in a way this curse of linearity, which is also then related to the curse of patriarchy, right? Which curses everyone. And the patriarchy, it's not just the feminines that are cursed; the masculines are cursed as well. So yeah, that's what all of that brought up for me. I think we've gotten off topic, but yeah, that's what I was thinking about when you said that. Gary, what else? Are you there?
Yeah, so that kind of, yeah, I'm right here. Can you hear me?
Okay, yeah, I can hear you.
So you're talking about the Devas and Asuras, right? So,
yeah,
and in this story, particularly about the giants and the Asgardians, the gods. The interesting thing is that there is this, the two realms where one is of constant want, constant greed, and the other is the comfort and the camaraderie that the gods share. It's interesting that I found that Odin, Honir, and Loki just go out to travel the wilderness just because.
Yeah.
For no good reason. I mean, they don't even plan their picnic. They don't take anything with them to eat. So they just realize, oh, you know what? We're hungry now. Yeah. We've traveled so much, we've trekked so much that we start to feel hungry. So there is this sense of just being versus the sense of, there's greed and want and hunger and all of that from the giant realm. It's very interesting how they interact, and I'm just fascinated that there's so much to take from it. Just like the wheel of the Bhavachakra, right? It's almost exactly like that in the sense. So when we're talking about nourishment of the sacred, it's just so. I mean, I loved the analogy that you gave where we try to force the nourishment of the sacred into the profane, trying to make it a tool for, say, productivity and a tool for, sort of better health. I'm not that any of that is wrong. It's great if we can harness, the wisdom that way. But also when we try to pound ourselves, that can turn into its own profane thing where we're saying, oh, I'm not spiritual enough to harness meditation into productivity. I'm not sort of capable enough, and that becomes its own competence shaming kind of a thing. So but it's fascinating that there is a constant looking towards the sacred, even when we're in this profane realm. So I think that's really telling to me that we never really lose sight of the sacred, even if it's for its own profane purposes. The fascinating thing is there's no denying of the sacred. We know sacred exists. We'll pretend like it doesn't, but we know it exists. Right. We want it. I think it's kind of beautiful in its own way that even while being stuck so hard in the profane, we don't deny the sacred. It's there. We know it's there. So,
well, I mean, the eagle has appetite for the golden apples too, not just the oxen meat.
Not just the oxen meat. It wants one level first, and then the next level it goes straight to the apples and says, "I want that ultimately." Yeah. Right. So it's so it's just beautiful and fascinating.
Good.
So, would you like to share the reflection exercise?
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. We're we're almost done. Okay. Okay. So the exercise we came up with here, and the way we do this, for those of you who are new, we suggest these exercises. But remember, principle 4 of sacred space: no expectation of participation. You don't have to do this. It's only if you want. There won't be any quiz. It's just a suggestion of just a random brainstorm of if you wanted to go deeper what is something you could do? And so one question to reflect on, and you can just like sit in your car alone for 10 minutes or sit in a room or go for a walk. I would bring some paper to write down so that it's like outside your head and you can look at it. But to reflect and write some notes on the following question, which is, what is an instance in your own life where your appetite, right, your desire for money, prestige, or pleasure, or emotional validation, led you to take something from your realm of sacred and drag it into the realm of fear, threat, or control? Okay, here's an example. So you see this in very talented children all the time. If they're good at something, piano or soccer or singing, right? Nothing wrong with enrolling in classes, wanting to enter into a few contests here or there. That's not intrinsically a profane act. But when you bring these talents into the profane, right, it is hard to maintain the physics of the sacred while soaking in the profane. It's doable, but it's exhausting, right? So, so if your natural talent is to be a musician, right, and you're so good in the competitive world of professional music, you can make it as a musician, right, and win all these contests and like have all these albums sold. That's okay. You're in the profane world at that point. And it is just hard. It's just the physics of it. It's not because you're ignorant or anything. It's just hard to stay in the profane world and continue to make the music that you made when you were in the sacred realm. Right? So artists will often like go away from the public eye and try to kind of reclaim what they lost when they got too famous. Right? But this happens all the time. So Odin can live in Midgard. He's Odin. He can live wherever he wants. But he chooses to live in the sacred realm of Asgard, where the golden apples are, for a reason. Right? And whatever Odin does is typically like the thing you want. It's like the meta sort of golden apple. He is the wise one of the Norse system who gave up one of his physical eyes. So when you see him, he has an eye patch. He gave up one of his physical eyes for the opportunity to drink from the sacred cup that would give him full knowledge of everything. Right? So when the eagle comes for a share, he lets the eagle have a share. And then when the eagle goes overboard, Odin doesn't enforce it, Loki enforces it and sets all those things in motion. So, so then the way to ask it is, what are the sacred things in your life? The things that came out of you from a zone devoid of fear, threat, or control. Right? As a child, like, you're at home, it's summer, school is out, nobody's making you do lessons or anything. You're just like bored at home, endless summer. And with all that boredom and time on your hands, what do you find yourself doing? Right? This is a key question we ask in Bliss. Right? This is why boredom is so powerful. When you're actually fully bored, you're not in terror. You're not like, oh my gosh, I have to finish all these deadlines. And when you actually allow yourself to be bored, things will come out of you, right, that are the apples of the sacred. So when you discover these as a child, if you were able to discover these, did you actually try to bring any of them into the profane? How did that work? Right? Are you okay with that? And if you were not okay with how that worked, what are some of the adjustments you might want to make? Right? Something that you found nourished your soul. You drag it in to nourish your body, your prestige wounds, your desire for money and all that. And that is okay to a degree, right? If the eagle visited Idun in her garden and asked for a golden apple, she might give him a piece of it or a bite of it, right? But there's also this sense of there's a line you don't want to cross. There's a line you don't want to cross. The golden apples of nourishing wisdom that impart insight are of the sacred. Right? When you clench down and try to bring them into a profane realm, you lose the insight and you lose the nourishing wisdom. So the exercise is, what is an example of something like that may have happened in your life? Only if you want, and no expectation of participation. Okay. Okay, so we're at 12 noon my time, so I'll go ahead and close Sacred Space and close the session. Our next session is in a month, and Gary, I think, or me, will put up the link to that. Let me just put it here. That one, oh, sorry. Let me put this on Facebook too. Yeah. So if you feel so moved, you can go ahead and sign up now or right after the session. It's free, open to the public. You can invite friends only if you want. And then I'll go ahead and close the session. So I hereby close the session of our shared sacred space. Thank you for holding this space with me and with us. And thank you for sharing the nourishment, the emotional nourishment, and the spiritual nourishment of this shared sacred space with us. I give you my blessing. Go in peace, bestowed with blessing, free of fear, free of threat, and free of the undue control of others. Have a great day, have a great month, and I will see you all in the next session. Thank you so much. Bye.